Ba-da-ba-ba, ba-da-ba-ba. All right. Promoter 101. 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 Promoter 101.
This is Francois Baptiste with 3D Productions. I'm on Promoter 101.
It's springtime, and Promoter 101 is letting our hair down with AEG Asia's Adam Wilkes in our feature segment today.
Dan, if that weren't enough firepower, we've also got AEG operations head from Germany, Aissata Hartmann, here with a war story.
AEG from Asia to Germany, one action-packed podcast. Here we go.
Let's do it. Dan, I've got to ask you about a JPEG that you posted this week on socials. Nate Bargatze, the Tennessee comic who's out with another hit next special right now, and CA's Brian Hill with a caption, "Never seen to the same place." Pretty amazing this week.
The sad thing is Brian looks more like Nate than he did when we took the picture of the one that we have on file. But yeah, it seems like something's going on there. Like they might be related. I don't know. Just look a whole lot alike. That just seems to be the buzz around the industry right now.
Both those Middle Tennessee guys looking quite alike.
Hi, this is Jamie Kelsel, an agent at APA in Los Angeles, and I am on Promoter 101.
Luke, so I think I finally got it figured out now. So you're telling me you can listen to Promoter 101 on SoundCloud and iTunes and Spotify with your phone, right?
Holy shit, Connor, you finally got it right. Yes, that's it. And there's so many, many more places you can be listening to this podcast.
Oh, thanks, Luke. I'm going to go catch up on Promoter 101 right now.
If you've got something you want to share with us, just simply email us at steiny@promoter101.net. We'd be happy to respond to you day or night. Operators are standing by.
That's right. We are all over social media as well, so you're more than welcome to follow us. Find us wherever you're having the conversation. We're on Twitter. I'm W. Luke Pierce, Stan's the Jew. The show's Promoters 101. That's Promoters, plural.
You can find us on Instagram at SteinyPromoter101. Luke is W. Luke Pierce. I am Dan Presents.
Facebook, if you're still on it, Promoter 101.
Well, and if MySpace, if you're still on it, we're not, so don't look for us there. We're at a whole bunch of other places. Just search for Promoter 101.
Hey, this is Chris Tatzelli from 7S Management, and I'm on Promoter 101.
Time to celebrate some birthdays for the week of April 9th to the 15th, 2019.
Tuesday, 4/9, Brian O'Boyle and Mike Leahy.
And on Wednesday, wishing a happy birthday to Live Nation's Kevin Stone.
4/11, Larry Murray.
On Friday the 12th, that's not Friday the 13th, Dan. Happy birthday to Reed Glick and Stacey George.
4/13, Gordon Mason and Andrew Prince.
Sunday the 14th, wishing a happy birthday to Mark Balin and all the way across the pond, Ticketmaster's Tom Wilridge.
Monday the 15th, Toby Leighton Pope, Ken Vermeglish, and Nikki Sweet.
Wonderful wishes to everybody on your birthdays from the gang here at Promoter 101.
Fergie, Tour Design. I'm on Promoter 101.
Up next, we have a very special war story in this very international edition of Promoter 101. Joining us now from Anschutz Entertainment Group's head of operations in Germany, Aissata Hartmann.
Talk to me.
We had a show with Sting doing a symphonic show at our venue. And Branford Marsalis was part of that show, and I knew him from the jazz tours I did. And so I found myself in the dressing room with the two guys, and we were just chatting. And then all of a sudden, Sting was like, "Hey, does anyone want a mint?" And we're like, "Yeah, why?" And he's like, "Yeah, take it, and then you sing like Sting." And I still try to do it, but maybe I'm a female, so it doesn't work.
Every breath you take.
Yeah. It was fun just making fun of himself.
Mints by Sting.
Yeah.
It's a personal touch. It's how you connect with the venue staff. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
What a great war story. We'll have her back for a full interview soon here on Promoter 101.
Hello, this is Sarah Mertz. I work at Eventbrite, and you are listening to Promoter 101.
It's time for the unveiling of the Promoter 101 Badass of the Week. Who we got, Dan?
This week goes out to Live Nation New York, Stacey George. She is a booking machine, making her this week's Promoter 101 Badass of the Week.
Congrats goes out to Stacey, celebrating a birthday this Friday, and the Promoter 101 Badass of the Week. Certainly a great week ahead.
Susan Rosenbluth, Golden Voice. on Promoter 101.
In our featured interview this week, we continue our London sessions with AEG Asia's Adam Wilkes.
Hanging out with Adam Wilkes in London. How you doing, man?
I'm good. How you doing, Dan?
Pretty good. So you get to do Asia, which has got to be just a challenge to promote in because you're mostly bringing in artists, right? It's mostly importing international artists, not so much local, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I work across our business in Asia, and even just using the term Asia is almost a westernized way to think about it because each one of these countries really identify with themselves individually, not necessarily as the continent. You know, for our business, as it's grown, we're working now from Japan to Mumbai. We're working from Beijing to Brisbane. So you've got a couple dozen markets. You've got places that are just wildly different when you start looking at the cultural differences. You look at the language differences, rules of law, currency, music taste, the kind of infrastructure that's in place. So you could look at it as one consolidated region, and in some perspective, that's how we do. But on the other side, you have to really understand and appreciate the vast differences and nuances between the various markets.
So how many shows a year is your office seeing right now?
Well, part of our business is real estate based. So in our venues in China, we have a couple hundred shows a year that go through there. And then as the promoter side of the business, we're doing about 100 to 150 shows, depending on a touring cycle.
Are you ever seeing both sides of the business?
Yeah. My role has evolved. So when I first joined AEG, it's when the company came into China on the back of a deal with the Beijing Olympics, and we took over designing and running the Beijing Olympic basketball arena, which is now called Cadillac Arena. So that was 2008. I came on after that as AEG went into Shanghai to set up the Mercedes-Benz Arena, or what's now the Mercedes-Benz Arena. At the time, it was built for the World Expo. So the company was very China-focused and wanted to set up a promoter function to support the real estate in the markets. And I joined and set up what was then the AEG Live office, now AEG Presents. So for the first few years, it was very China-focused between Shanghai and Beijing. And then, you know, we started just going in every direction. You know, sometimes being a promoter is a bit like the game of Risk. So you start looking at other places nearby and looking at, you know, if we could do this in Shanghai, why can't we do this in Hong Kong? Why can't we do this in Taipei and so on? So the business started to grow. And we started to look at the opportunity across the region where, you know, some of these markets were very developed, markets like Japan and Korea that had promoters there for many decades. And there were places where there really wasn't that much going on, but there was an opportunity to do more. The business very organically grew across more and more markets. So that went on for quite a few years. In more recent times, my role changed, and I look over sort of all of the AEG sides of the business. So I went from running the AEG Presents business to, I continue to do that, and I also look across the AEG corporate business. So that involves the real estate business in China, some of our sports business, some of the things we do in ticketing, sponsorship, some of the new real estate development.
Internationally, there's clearly a global game going on between both Live Nation and AEG, and the independent promoters don't really show up in this game of Risk because it's their one region for the most part and not playing the global game that both of you guys are playing now. So when it comes to this global dominance and tour deals and 360s and world deals, are you seeing most of your content come over from those 360 deals that are acts that you're working with everywhere? Or are you guys buying just for the region in most cases?
You know, it's all of the above, and it's evolved a lot. You know, when I started doing this, I was an independent promoter in China, and that was long before the bigger groups had come in, and they really hadn't come in anywhere in Asia at that point. So I've seen that evolution. And even in my earlier days in AEG, and I've been there 9 years now, you didn't see so much of the global tours. You saw some. There was a few here and there, but there wasn't that many.
It's really kind of built out over the last handful of like 5-6 years.
Yeah, probably. And even then, you know, sometimes you hear about a global deal, but they don't necessarily always have global rights. Sometimes it's just US and Europe, US, Europe, and other pockets of markets. And sometimes they still carve out certain areas. What we see now, though, is probably, like I said, a combination of all three. So we have some global deals, and we'll run the Asia or sometimes other markets as well. Sometimes we do just tour deals just for Asia or Asia Pacific that are not part of any kind of global deal. Sometimes an AEG may have an artist in one market, but not globally, but we also get Asia, or we don't have anywhere, but we do get Asia. Sometimes we just do certain cities in Asia. There's every combination of it. I think that, yeah, the trends are definitely going that there's two big players that are very aggressively competing, and you're seeing more and more artists do global deals. It used to be that it was just that top tier, and I think what you're seeing now is artists at an earlier stage in their career are starting to do that. So that is the trend, you know, and we'll see how that evolves over the next few years.
How the fuck do you wind up in Asia as an independent promoter? Because you don't look like you have roots there.
Yeah, that's a long story. That's probably longer than this podcast. But the abbreviated version is I left the U.S. when I was 19, and I ended up in Spain as an exchange student, which led to not going home and traveling to a number of other places. I spent a bit of time in Europe.
Did you kill a man in Reno and you just had to bail?
Just a terrible college kid in Boston wanted to get out of town, you know?
Got it, okay.
I needed a change.
You're like, Boston's not working, let's hit Asia?
I had never thought about Asia. Asia was just a fluke. Sort of a series of bad life decisions, I think, brought me there. And then and I've been struggling to figure out how to escape ever since. But I spent some time in Europe. I ended up in South America for quite some time. I was living in Colombia and did some time in Latin America. And the story goes on and on. If you go back in time, this is 20 years ago. This was right when China was starting to open economically. You know, now it's all over the news. Every day it's America versus China. Everything's about China, positive or negative. But at that time, it was just starting. And if you follow the news, every once in a while you hear a story and it was interesting. It was something was going on there. And I was in Bogota and I was really not doing anything, just hanging out as a young guy. And it was an exciting place to be, but it was exciting in kind of a negative way. There was basically a war going on between the FARC and the paramilitaries. There was bombs going off and people were getting kidnapped. And I was hanging out there and I had this epiphany that I wasn't Colombian and there was no reason why I needed to be there. And I wanted to go somewhere else. So a few stops later, I made it to Shanghai and I thought that I'd spend a few weeks. And first thing is I ran out of money. So that made a few weeks into a few more weeks and the story goes on. So I ended up staying there.
So you had to find a job while you were there to like sustain.
I needed to find a job. So what captured me though is that Shanghai at that point, and it's a very different place now, but at that point it was very early days in China. It was very early days in Shanghai. There was an excitement, and there was an excitement being in Colombia as well, but it was a different kind of excitement. There was a positive energy excitement. There was really interesting things happening, and I was too young to be able to really understand or articulate what was happening. And I don't think really anybody knew it was happening, but you know, now we can look back and say, wow, well, look at how China changed over the last decade, 2 decades. But there was something there and it kept me. And that kept me for a few weeks. And then I ran out of money and I needed to make some money. Found a nightclub and I started putting on little shows, mostly like DJ, dance parties,
so you're a
little
club
bands.
promoter.
I was a little club promoter, Chinese club promoter. So I did that for a few years and made, you know, just enough money to not buy a plane ticket, but to subsidize a fun lifestyle for a really young guy, and got to sort of witness and participate in some of the change that was happening there. And it was doing really small things, mostly DJs, did a lot of hip hop shows earlier on, which was really kind of the first time that music was coming in the market. Then started bringing in really small bands, you know, 200, 500, 1,000 capacity. Nothing really made that much money, but it was enough to keep going. And then SARS hit, if you recall, in the early 2000s. Yeah, and the bird flu. It completely shut down China for a while. The whole place came to a halt.
And Axe probably didn't want to go there.
Axe didn't want to go there, but this was long before China had become this economic powerhouse. So something like that really just shut the place down.
People don't want to be in a mass group of people at a concert.
People did not want to be in a mass group of people. It was sort of textbook communism reaction to this. So the first thing that they did was they just denied. There is no bird flu. There is no bird flu. And, you know, you got to keep in mind that a lot of international or Western media sources are blocked there. So, you know, you're so influenced by your surroundings. So, yeah, I'd talk to my mom and she'd say, oh my God, I saw on CNN, there's bird flu. Are you okay? And I'd look outside. Everything's fine. Everybody seemed fine. You know, so they kept telling everybody there was no bird flu. There was no bird flu. But there was bird flu. That was the reality. And then they ended up admitting that there was actually, no, there's a couple people. There's 2, you know, there's 10. And that went on for a little while. And finally, I mean, this is all documented in the news. There was a whistleblower. There was some senior level military guy, a general or something, basically said, no, there's a huge outbreak. As much as there is going on in places like Hong Kong and other places that are transparently reporting it, there's a lot of bird flu going on. Then it sort of came to phase 2, which was admitted there was bird flu, but that it had been kept a secret from the senior government. And they did what only a communist country could do. So they just turned off all the trains. They just stopped people from being able to move. So when there's an epidemic, you have to contain. You know, we've all seen these zombie movies and stuff, right? You have to contain it. So it was right before, if I remember the timing correctly, there was a big Chinese holiday coming up. and you have a lot of migrant workers. And then when the holidays happen, the migrant workers go home, and you have hundreds of millions of people
What a
that
great
leave.
way to distribute an infection.
Exactly. In the tier 1 cities, they had the medical infrastructure to deal with this, but in the smaller towns, they couldn't deal with it. For a lot of the migrant workers who are just, poor people that are working in a big city, they're not necessarily well educated. Suddenly they hear that there's an outbreak of the bird flu. What do you want to do? You want to go home. So, in the way that you could only do this in a communist country, they just basically turned off the transportation, kept everybody there. They started putting people in hospitals, sort of somewhere like that, whatever that line is between like a jail and a hospital. They put them in those places.
Scary.
And then they ended up arresting the whistleblower. So that was a crazy time there. So everything stopped. Back to my little business. So that definitely derailed my...
So it turned off the revenue.
It turned off the revenue. It turned off the momentum we had. And I left China for a little while. Maybe I was there about 2.5 years at that point. It was what a wild journey, just totally unexpected. And
you were ready to move on to the next part of your Where in the World is Carmen San Diego trip.
For whatever chapter in the book that was, the China phase.
Checked off.
Yeah. So I left for a bit. I had become really good buddies with this gentleman who was running Sony Music in China. And he reached out months later just to, check in, hey, let's go have lunch or something. And I said, no, actually, I left China, SARS, not much going on. And he was like, no, it's over. You got to come back. And I said, I think I've done my China chapter. I wouldn't come back, unless there was, a compelling reason. So he ended up offering me a job, and that was sort of brought me back to China for a bit. I worked at Sony Music for a while, and that became very interesting because it became a real education into the broader music industry in China and Asia, and from a record label perspective, learning more about the domestic artists. And I was there for a little while, but the main take home was that, like everywhere in the world, the recording business was dying, and the activity and the interest was really around live music, which I already knew that, but it was certainly a good education to spend some time at Sony there in China. And then that led me to when I became sort of a more structured independent promoter myself, a guy named Steve Sebesma, who Sunshine Promotions sold to SFX early on.
With Dave Lucas.
Steve and Dave, I think, were one of the early guys that sold. And Dave stayed with SFX into Clear Channel. Steve left at whatever point along the way. For whatever reason, he ended up in China. And I was working with this guy named Rob Spitzer, who I work with now as well. And he was Live Nation before, but before that, we were both together. So the three of us formed a little company in China called China West. And this was probably 2004. We ran a little small independent promotion company. We were the first guys in the market, which was arguably not a good thing because we were there way too early.
So you had the vision.
We believe that there was a bigger play there. And there is, and there was.
You were just ahead of the pitch.
We just were ahead of the pitch, and we were a small company. So, every show we were scrambling to bring in investment. And
which had to be a huge problem there because convincing acts to come over had to be a financial thing if you were playing with the bigger acts.
Yeah, this is when we started to go into the bigger acts, and it was a huge burden. And we were always able to find partners on a one-off show basis. We needed like an AEG or a Live Nation or somebody of that level to say, we believe this is going to take 5 years, so let's put the investment in and go with it. That was very hard. And this was really before it became such a globalized business, at least as it related to Asia. So we had some successes, we had some failures, did a lot of growing up along the way, but it was a great time, and it was a simple time. It was the three of us in an office about half the size of this hotel room. We lived like brothers, We fought, we worked together, we had lunch together, we had dinner together, and we did some really good work at the time.
So that led to a Randy Phillips conversation at some point, I imagine?
Yeah, there's a few steps along the way, but it was Meglin. I met Lewicki early on as he started looking around from the real estate side and closing a deal in Beijing. And then Meglin, who was Randy, of course, later on, but Meglin first.
I could see why he'd like your company. China West fits with Concerts West so perfectly.
Yeah, we stole his half of his name.
Just seemed like a natural thing that you guys would fit together at some point.
It did. We only had to change one word to sort of go into the current name.
So was it a sale?
It wasn't a sale because there was another stop in the middle. So we were competing with another company called Emma Entertainment. And Emma had a ticketing function. There really wasn't ticketing in China at the time. That was a bit of the joke of the whole thing. Ticketing, and this is the crazy thing about China because it's changed so fast. And now you have the likes of the Alibabas and the Tencents. They're multi-$100-billion companies that are, across all areas of e-commerce. But at the time, ticketing was that we had in our office a table with all the tickets on them.
So you guys were doing it like it was the 70s, running around to record stores.
It was the 70s in China at the time. It's just China has evolved in dog years. Everything in China was bike couriers. So whatever you needed, somebody would show up at your house on a bicycle, not like a motorcycle. You'd give them money. Everything was cash. Now it's all mobile. Everything in China is mobile payment. You can go for 3 weeks in China with $10 in your pocket, and 3 weeks later you have $10 in your pocket. Everything is mobile pay, which hasn't taken off in other parts of the world, but there everything is. At the time, everything was cash. And their currency, the renminbi, is about 1 to 100 renminbi is about $15. So the point is, like, it stacks up. It's a big block of red money. So we would have somebody on the bicycle go to your house with the 2 tickets, and they'd cost $100 US. So you'd get a big stack of this money, and then they'd ride back. So that was our ticketing. The other guys, they had the same thing as us. They just called it a ticketing company. It was just our, like, the table in the back of the office. So we competed with them. They came a little bit later than us, but they were definitely formidable competitors. We'd get a show, they'd get a show. Anyway, jump ahead, they got bought by Ticketmaster. It really changed the whole dynamic of the market, because all of a sudden it was the independents, and then one of them was funded by Ticketmaster. And this is before the Ticketmaster Live Nation merger. So this is just Ticketmaster independently. So they were both a promoter and a ticketing company. It really just kind of made for a very lopsided competition at that point.
So they were funded by a powerhouse corporation at that point, and you guys were still an independent.
Yeah.
That could change the competition a little bit.
Yeah, that was demoralizing at the time. But it was also exciting. I was 23, 24 years old at the time. We just wanted to do good work. We just wanted to put on shows. We believed there was an opportunity in the market. We were just starting to get a taste of it, but we were struggling. And there was things that, as a company, because we didn't have the financing that we missed, or things that we had in our hand that we had to let go of. And it was frustrating, because it was like a lot of start and stops. We competed again for a little while, but it became incredibly lopsided very, very fast. So those guys reached out, and Ticketmaster was very focused on the ticketing, but they needed people to run the concert side. So myself and Rob Spitzer left, and we went over and we built out the concert side of that business.
At Emma,
which then it basically was rebranded Ticketmaster, or Emma Ticketmaster. And that went on for a little while. And then AEG came along. It was around the Olympics in Beijing.
So no regrets on how that played out overall?
No regrets on anything.
You wind up at AEG. How did that happen?
The AEG part came in where the company got involved with a venue in Beijing. Shortly after that, got involved with the construction and development of a venue that later was opened in Shanghai, and they wanted to set up a concert arm. So one part of the company said, we need a function to program the venues in China. And then the other function, which was Meglin's team, was he was looking at where things were going.
We need a local partner there to produce our shows.
We need a representative in Asia. Even though at that time, most of the deals were still U.S. into Europe, the writing was on the wall. It was going to become more global deals.
We need somebody that represents us there to oversee the shows.
Yeah. As a company, we spent the first probably 2 years really just primarily focused on China. And then that evolved pretty quickly into, like I said, the game of risk. It became a lot of other markets. And over a period of about 5 or 6 years, we grew into a business that took a lot of top artists. Mostly we were working, with the Concert West type artists that Meglin was across. So it was a lot of arena or stadium artists. Did a lot of stuff with Louis Messina, did a lot of stuff with Brian Murphy at the time. It became a pretty exciting business that went across a lot of different markets.
It has occurred to me that you are working for a big corporation, but you're actually working for the biggest independent promoter in the world. You're funded by one guy. Phil Anschutz is just an independent promoter. He just happens to be a really fucking big one.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
It's no different than when you were doing shows yourself. He's just better funded with more infrastructure.
Yeah. Look, this company, AEG, is a very entrepreneurial company. It's the kind of company where nobody really tells you what to do. You show up the first day of work. There's not really like here's what you're supposed to do, especially as it related to the area that I've worked in, which is all new markets for the company. There's no road book for this. We have a strategy, but from a starting point, it was like, let's go figure this out. So it came at it from a very entrepreneurial perspective. I think it depends on your personality. For some people, that's probably terrifying. For others, I think it's really exciting. And you've seen some people really thrive in that kind of environment. Yeah, maybe the biggest independent promoter in the world. But because we're not publicly traded, because we're not private equity, we don't have a bunch of shareholders that need to see a 3 and a 5 year return. We can go somewhere and we can try something out, and we can be patient. I think that's very unique.
I'm a little green in this space. So does the festival space exist in Asia the way it does in Europe and the United States and Canada?
It's not as developed yet.
Are you starting to get into that? Because AEG has certainly been a player in that space.
We're starting to look at that. We're not in that space in Asia yet. In Japan, there's 2 big festivals that have been around forever that are fantastic, world-class festivals that are similar to what you would see in Europe and the U.S. You have some pockets of smaller things across Asia. Some interesting ones, all independently run. A couple of them are very, very well done, cool festivals, but it's not nearly as developed as here. It's not always about the bigger headliners. It's a lot of smaller, independent, local events.
So no Coachella China yet?
No Coachella China yet.
Be cool though.
We just have to figure out how to get like a direct flight from Palm Springs to...
I think you could actually charter something because that'd be a lot of people.
We need a big plane though.
A really big plane. Maybe 2 flights. Do you have any advice for the younger guys coming up in the industry on how to break into the international market?
Move out east. come somewhere new.
Run out of money somewhere? And
Yeah,
just
run out of
figure
money
it out?
somewhere and figure it out. Look, I think being in a market that's developing is an interesting place to be for a younger person in your career, because you could, despite all of the obstacles and the challenges, you can get your hands across and be involved in some bigger projects than you may if you were lower down in the food chain in a developed market. So come try something new in a new place.
Adam, you fascinate me. This has been really enlightening. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Adam is just killing it in Aegis. So impressive. Stoked to bring him to you right here on Promoter 101.
This is Arielle Hyatt from Cyber PR on the Promoter 101 podcast.
This week's quote comes to us from Michael Dell. Don't spend so much time trying to choose the perfect opportunity that you might miss the right opportunity. Deep, man.
Wise words from the man from Austin, kind of Voltaire-esque. Perfect is the enemy of the good, right, Dan? That's a little bit derivative there.
I didn't realize he was from Austin. I just like the idea of thinking about Michael Dell at Stubbs or something, like in the dirt checking out a show.
He seems like that kind of guy who might enjoy a sweaty show at Stubbs.
You just get a vision of like him rolling with the Charlies. That just seems like a fun hang. Michael Dell and the Charlies.
That is a good image of folks together there.
This is Eddie Clemens from United Talent Agency. I'm here on Promoter 101.
That'll do it for episode 140 of Promoter 101. Thank you to everybody who tuned in today. Thank you to our wonderful guest from AEG Asia, Adam Wilkes, and AEG Germany, Aissata Hartmann. Thank you for coming on this podcast. Really appreciate your time. If you liked what you heard today, please shoot us a note to steiny@promoter101.net. We would love to hear from you. Let us know how we're doing.
We'll be back this Thursday at 5 p.m. on the Pacific Coast, 8 p.m. on the Eastern Coast, and Greenwich Mean Time, well, it'll be midnight.
Increasingly applicable to our international audience, and appropriately so, because this Thursday we're going to have a full featured interview from AEG Germany's Aissata Hartmann back in the podcast, sitting down to talk about her experiences working for one of the biggest venue operations team in the globe.
Until then, we're wishing you sold out shows for the week to come.
Cheers. Call your mother.
Hi, I'm Leslie Olenek from Live Nation Touring, and I'm on Promoter 101.
Ba-da-ba-ba.